My name is Steve Strang. I'm the Managing Director of the Red River Basin Commission.
My name is Hank Venema. I'm the CEO and Senior Engineer at Strategic Systems Engineering.
I would like to welcome you to a series of videos that we're putting together regarding LiDAR. In the following videos, you will learn how to use LiDAR data and the tools to better understand current and future climate risks. How can we address them, and how do we make a case for climate resilience? These series are targeted at municipal, provincial, and Indigenous governments, and they're open for anyone who has interest in learning more about climate adaptation. If followed in order, no experience is required here, and we will share additional content and resources to help you succeed in your climate adaptation planning. We will dive deep into the tools, the programming, and concepts needed to create valuable adaptation plans for your area. So let's get started.
Well, everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this workshop this afternoon. It's really exciting for the Red River Basin Commission to be involved in the LiDAR workshop. It's been something that we've been putting together for a long time. Oh. And Steve and his team, together with Hank Venema, have been working on this piece for quite a significant amount of time. And it's just, again, goes to show a couple of things that are important for us as Red River Basin. The one is working with multiple partners on a program like this. It took a lot of funding, a lot of people, and a lot of skills to put something together like this. But more importantly, we really hope, and from the number of people that have signed in, it feels like we're on the right track. It's really scratching where it itches. It's something that a lot of people see value in. LiDAR is a critical tool that for many of the partners that are signed in today is a tool that you can use well into the future. It's something that we haven't used to its full extent, nearly to its full extent yet. And I believe that for watershed districts, municipalities, and others, it's a tool that you can use as we look at building climate resilient communities in the future. So thanks so much for joining us. It's really exciting to see the interest in the workshop. It's the beginning of a longer series, and we hope that as we head into the future, we will continue to develop deeper and deeper workshops so that it becomes a more useful tool for us in the future. But right now, that's all from myself. I didn't actually introduce myself. I apologize for that. My name is Gavin Vanderland, and I'm the chair of the Red River Basin Commission. And I'd like to hand over now to Steve Strang, who's the Managing Director of the Manitoba office. Steve, over to you.
Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming out today. This is, we've all been waiting quite a long time. If you look back to the event we had in Portage la Prairie in 2019, it was so very well attended. There was, at that time too, I think we saw about 125 people out. So there's definitely is a need for the understanding of what LiDAR can bring to all communities, to some businesses, and it's a great teaching tool for all who wish to learn. I've got a few house duties before we get started. I'm going to ask you all to keep muted, except for myself and Hank and Don and a few that are going to talk. So Rebecca, if you could keep everybody muted, I would be very grateful. I certainly want to give a shout out to a few folks here. I know we have folks from as far west as Killarney, as far north as the University College of the North and the PA who are watching us. So special shout out to Will and the students there. I believe Mitch is also there. Thanks guys for listening in. I want to take a moment to recognize my staff. Like Gavin said, it's a big effort to put an event on like this, and we cannot do it by ourselves. I have some amazing people working here, so a special shout out to Rebecca and to Tammy. You guys are great. I'm grateful. Thank you so much for being a super staff and super partners on this. We want to take a second to recognize our funders. This wouldn't be going on if the Federation of Canadian Municipalities hadn't come to the table with financial support. That financial support allowed us to complete the LiDAR data collection in the portions of the south, which would have been the Pembina Valley area, and also to the north and the Interlake. And It was because of the FCM and now the Royal Bank, who's come in to help us fund putting this first phase of our LiDAR manual together. We're very grateful for that, so we want to recognize them. And also we want to recognize the city of Winnipeg and the town of Morris, because they played a strong role in us getting our funding through the FCM. So thank you to those communities. And of course, the Manitoba Association of Watersheds and all the watershed partners that we have. We have 5 great watersheds in the Red River Basin area. And each one of the watershed managers are strong partners. And without them, we would not be being able to succeed. Today's session is brought to you by the Red River Basin, but also we run 2 chapters. And we have the North chapter, who's led by Charles. Penny is there with him, and Stan, and also the South, where you'll hear from Don soon, Marvin, Mervin, and Ed. And they all play a strong role in what we do. So thank you very much to them. And I want to say that, you know, at the end of this time, we want to continue to build on this. And as I said, that we will be looking at doing an intermediate level and advanced level. And I think the need is truly shown as we're having so many to pick this up and to attend, and to have people coming from all different locations, all different walks of life, really show that's a strong, strong need. So with that said, I will hand it over to Don.
On behalf of the South Chapter and all the municipalities that partnered with us, we are pleased to have been part of an effort that brought LiDAR to Manitoba region of the Red River Basin. And today we are proud to present a new video series that will assist with the utilization of this tool. You remember that we had our initial meeting in Portage, and that was before the COVID pandemic. This pandemic disrupted our plans for more training sessions, and we changed directions and decided to produce a series of training videos. From a historical perspective, the event that got us started on this quest was the 1997 flood of the century. It was after this event that Minnesota North and the South Dakota began the collection of LiDAR data in order to help with building a more proactive approach to flood preparation. By 2006, these states had completed their collection of LiDAR data, and now we're finally catching up on the Manitoba section of the Red River Basin. As we well know, this basin is presently experiencing drought conditions with severe water shortages and water restrictions. We're also experiencing severe weather events with greater frequency and intensity, hence climate change. As a result of all this, the provincial government, municipalities, conservation districts, and ag producers have taken a renewed interest in the quality and quantity aspects of water management. This includes flooding, drought, wetland renewal, nutrient removal strategies, carbon storage, and environmental education. The use of LiDAR data is one of the tools we can use to build a proactive strategy in water management. And as said before, the Red River Basin Commission is honored to play a partnership role with FCM, the province, the city of Winnipeg, the town of Morris, and all the municipalities that work to make this a success. Thank you, and now back to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Don. Very, very appreciative of the greetings. So we want to get started, and let's talk a little bit about LiDAR. So what is LiDAR? Well, LiDAR is light detection and ranging. And the simplicity of LiDAR is that, you know, from your picture you see before you have laser lights mounted on a plane, and they're bouncing back and forth, and that information is collected. And then that data is then utilized and worked into data that can be utilized for different types of software. And it's pretty simple. So the light comes off the plane, the measurement from the time it hits the ground and comes back is what they measure. And with different parts of that, they're able to configure LiDAR into different usages. So I want to talk a little bit about the history and when LiDAR came in. And you all recall the flood of 1997. And you can recall there's a picture of Grand Forks on fire. I think that was the title of one of the newspapers, Grand Forks on fire, and we all sat by our television and all, and we watched this happen. And then as the waters came forward into Manitoba, we understood that the cost toward Manitoba was over $500 million. And that itself was just simply unbelievable. And that's kind of what initiated us starting to collect LiDAR. And as Don said, in 2006, the US and Manitoba started to collect LiDAR for the purposes of flood mitigation and mapping. And it wasn't until recently that Manitoba was to fulfill their portion in 2020. And that's as far as the basin. Manitoba is still not totally flowing, and we certainly want to encourage our provincial partners to try to maybe budget more and try to pick up more data as we all go forward. We understand the value of what it is. Why is it important? Well, it's a tool that allows us to adapt to the ongoing change that we are seeing in our weather. And you can kind of see that change as we go forward, and some of the pictures that were just before you are only part of it. And when we look at climate adaptation, we have to consider that better water management is there to protect ourselves, to protect our infrastructure. And in fact, that we have basic climate adaptation plans developed for both the North and South chapters, which we'll be presenting on the 13th, is really huge. And it's important that we all work together to move forward, because I think our future generations and our future communities all are going to rely on this tool in order to make a better tomorrow for everybody. So as we, the RBC, felt it was important to assist the municipalities, to assist the council, the staff to understand the value of what LiDAR is. We also want to recognize that, as we talked about our watersheds, we're still ongoing and there's a lot of work to be done. As the Pembina Valley just finished collecting theirs over the last year, I know that Cliff has been very busy in the Pembina starting to utilize the technology and the data in order to come forward with better water management plans. And as we also work in the north, as we work in the north, I know that Armin is doing the same in the Interlake. As Don said, we started off wanting to have our actual hands-on learning, but COVID has restricted us. And we've gone from hands-on to this video series, which you're about to start to see. The series regarding the manual portion are videos 1 to 5. And the portion about climate adaptation are videos 6 to 13. And today we will take the time to review these videos with you, to allow you to understand how to utilize this tool with the video series and the manual side by side. For some of you who have LiDAR experience, some of this may not be new to you, but for those who have none, we see this as the beginning. And if we can use this as the base and build forward on an intermediate and advanced level, we feel that it's important to share the technology and allow everybody to take advantage of it. At the beginning of this session, we want to start talking about video number 1 to 5, and that will address the issues of how does it actually work. So the first video is, what is LiDAR? And from there, I'm going to let Hank start to carry us through onto this session. Hank is working alongside of Matt at Strategic Engineering, and we contracted with Hank and Matt to do this work, and we're very honored to have them with us as a partner. So Hank, are you there?
Yes, Steve. Well, thank you. It is an honor to do this work. My association with the commission goes back well over a decade now, and our advocacy for Manitoba acquiring this data goes back a long time as well. Originally, I worked with the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce to put forth to get resolutions in place advocating to the province that we match the American commitment to acquiring this critical data resource for flood mitigation, and it took time. This was in the context of the previous provincial government. This is going back well over 5 years, 7 or 8 years. So it's taken time. It's taken time to get the financial commitments from the provincial government. It's taken time to get the contracts in place to fly the LiDAR. It's taken time to process the LiDAR, make it usable to everyday users. It's taken time to get the full coverage we have now for, well, most of municipal Manitoba. Our place in the value chain is on applications, is training other people to do what we do and advance applications of LiDAR. And it is a very rich area of modern engineering. The ability to use this data to understand flood risk at very high resolution, to understand drought risk and where we can store water, where we can build natural infrastructure, where we can build multifunctional retention storage. It's an extraordinary data asset, and we're honored to support the Commission's work and very fortunate to advance the application of the technology in this region. My suggestion, Steve, is we just go into the first videos and we let it roll and get the questions and have a dynamic conversation.
Definitely, that sounds great, Hank. So Hank, let's just talk a little bit about the video. So video one, if I may, Hank, video one is just the simplicity of what LiDAR is all about. And if you can just speak to that a little bit, we'll carry forward to LiDAR video number two.
Well, sure. LiDAR is originally a Canadian technology. It's based on the principle that you can shoot a laser at the ground, and based on very accurate information regarding the aircraft's speed and altitude, you can deduce the elevation of the land surface that this laser beam reflects off of within centimeters. And this is the extraordinary thing. It's such an efficient way to displace classical surveying methods. So instead of the classical surveying method of running a transect and getting elevations in a straight line, you get elevations across a continuous surface. It's really a dramatic change in how surveying is done. And the modern methods, the algorithms are so advanced nowadays that we can get elevations to within centimeters every square meter. So the first video explains that and provides the context for why we need this information with respect to climate adaptation.
Perfect. And let's talk about video number two. But before, we'll just run a short clip of video number two, and then we'll go from there.
Today we're going to look at how LiDAR data is collected and how is data useful in watershed planning. In our previous video, we mentioned that LiDAR is useful because it captures small differences in elevation. In the prairies, this is really important since the slightest slope will determine in which direction the water will run. It runs downhill, right? And during the spring melt, this could be the difference between staying safe and dry or having water coming up to your doorstep where you think you got to tie a canoe to the step. So how does LiDAR uses lasers to collect ground elevation data? Good question. An aircraft mounted with a LiDAR sensor flies over the area we're interested in. The location of the plane is tracked by GPS, which will capture the location, the speed, and the direction that the plane is flying. The LiDAR rangefinder laser uses pulses to capture the elevation. A pulse is a burst of light that goes in a straight line, reflects on an area, and then bounces back to the plane. The system records the time taken for the pulse to travel to the ground and back. And we know that light travels, well, at the speed of light, right? So we can use the speed and the travel time to calculate the distance between the plane and the ground. Now that we have the distance, we can calculate the elevation. If we record the altitude of the plane and subtract the distance between the plane and the ground, the one that we calculated using LiDAR, then we have a record of the ground elevation. Before this information becomes a data point, two corrections must be done. Most LiDAR pulses travel at an angle, so our system also records the angle to correct the measurement. So also winds and light turbulence make the plane move and roll a bit. These movements are tracked with the inertial measurement unit, or IMU. And the IMU corrects any movements of the plane to give us precise measurements. LiDAR data is a combination of the information transmitted by the laser rangefinder, the GPS coordinates, and that IMU. All this raw data is recorded on the onboard computer. Because LiDAR captures very precise elevation data, there is a short period of time when we can collect accurate data, Usually spring and fall seasons are best, especially when there's no vegetation or no snow. However, things like floods may distort the elevation survey, high winds, blowing snow, or dust in the air, which also interferes with the quality of the data. So the next section is truthing the data. So this data needs to be processed and truthed before we can use it. And once it's collected, we have a large amount of raw data that needs to be processed. Finding the ground truth or truthing is a way to calibrate and fine-tune the data collected to the landscape. Important features may not have been captured, and this is the time for correcting or adjusting data, which will include things like culvert inventory and submitting where all the culverts are so that we can understand the flow through of the water. The LiDAR data sets and files that you would expect to find and work with could look like this. This may look confusing at first, but we will learn how to use this information.
So thank you for that. And that video is part of video number 2, which is how LiDAR data is collected. That each of the videos are set up to the manual. And as a learning tool, you're able to watch the videos and review the manual at the same time. So this will help guide you through to get the knowledge you'll need in order for you to get your hands-on experience.
I'm just curious if anyone has some initial questions. This fairly generic introduction, very interesting technology, very interesting physics and math that gets us to this data. Does anyone have any general questions about the
I'm not seeing anything pop up, Hank, right now. So how about if we go on and we go into the second part of the video number 2.
In fact, Manitoba watershed districts currently use LiDAR data for floodplain mapping, drought consideration, or watershed planning. They are the local expertise that are on the ground. Unlike municipalities, water district borders are determined by the basin or the watershed they're responsible for. In this sense, their boundaries may overlap with several municipalities. Remember, water has no boundaries, but municipalities do. So let's hear from some of them.
Hi, I'm Jody Gertzen. I'm the Watershed District Manager for the Seine Rat Roseau Watershed District in southeastern Manitoba.
Hi, I'm Colin Looting, the manager of the Northeast Red Watershed District.
And I'm Sean Gertzen, Executive Director of Manitoba Association of Watersheds.
So what is a watershed? Well, a watershed is an area of land that captures all the rain. And if you picture an upside down umbrella and all the rain that falls into that umbrella would be the catchment or the watershed area.
A watershed district is made up of various geographical regions of Manitoba. Each district has a board of directors made up of municipal councillors and representatives from municipalities that are voluntarily part of the district. And watershed districts, they work with farmers and local communities to do watershed management. So to help build the resilience of our watersheds to climate change, to flooding, to droughts, to protect biodiversity, and a range of other issues.
Watershed District's strength is that it's a grassroots organization. It's local people making decisions on the landscape, and it's governed on a watershed basis, obviously, and not a political boundary basis. So that's a very important part of a watershed.
Watershed districts are a partnership between local farmers, landowners, community members, municipal councillors, the province of Manitoba. The federal government comes in on certain project-based funding, and there's other nonprofit organizations as well. So a wide range of partners come together on watershed district projects.
The watershed planning is just planning on priorities with respect to water management, surface water management, groundwater management, natural area preservation. Those things are all considered, and it's managed on a watershed basis. Each watershed will have its own differences and significances, so it's important to realize that and manage accordingly.
What it is it's basically looking at all the stakeholders in the watershed to develop what the assets are for that watershed and what the critical points are for protecting those assets, and then possibly the barriers to that protection, and then defining a strategy on how the stakeholders can work together with the watershed district as a lead planning authority to implement those important techniques.
You know, they don't just benefit one municipality, they benefit all of the municipalities in this watershed.
So LiDAR is important to the watershed districts because it helps us prioritize projects. It helps us use local knowledge to maybe confirm or maybe deny an area that is thought of as a potential project area.
LiDAR is really important because it helps us delineate the watershed lines, so the boundaries of where the water is coming from, so we can analyze how much water a retention cell is going to carry and what the impact is going to be for the local landowner and also for the downstream landowners.
Project we're standing on right now, we use LiDAR with the province of Manitoba to determine that this could actually work as a functioning retention site. We also were able to prioritize 18 other areas within the Cook's Devil's Creek watershed that all could be potential water retention areas. So provides great services to the watershed.
With LiDAR, we're also able to optimize and strategize to target our implementation for the best benefits and to reduce the impacts adversely for the most people.
I think LiDAR really complements the decades of knowledge that the watershed districts have, that their board members have, their staff like Colin, that the producers have in the area. All those people involved really know a lot about how water flows in their watersheds, and LiDAR just complements that. It adds hard data to what they already know. So it's a really important scientific foundation for watershed districts and other groups to be able to operate and do effective projects.
I want to give thanks to Jody, Sean, and Colin for all they do in their watersheds. Within the Red River Basin, we have a total of 5 watersheds. And what they bring is they're the troops on the ground. They're the big part of building success. And collectively together under a partnership, we work really well together. In this section, we learned how LiDAR data is collected. And we learned what watersheds are all about through some of the watershed managers within the Red River Basin. In the next section, we're going to learn where you can locate LiDAR data to download for the areas that you're in.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. So we do have a few questions, and I'd like to try to get them addressed. So Clayton had asked what is the process for the learning, and I think I can answer that one, Hank. The idea of this process is that the videos go alongside the manual, and you do section by section. In each section, you are given the opportunity to do hands-on learning. The idea of the videos is that it can give you a visualization of how to do something. And with the video and with the pictures that are on the manual and the steps by steps that have been done up, that will guide you to the first steps of the training. So that's how that one is. I have a question for you from John, Hank, and that is, where can you find LiDAR data for Manitoba on the web for free downloads? Maybe you can speak to that?
Yeah, the details are in the manual. And it's important to perhaps make one clarification here. The information that the aircraft collects is the raw LiDAR data, the point cloud. What the province of Manitoba has done is done the processing of those point clouds and has published what is known as a digital elevation model. And this is an unusually fine, high-resolution digital elevation model. It's at 1 meter resolution, and that's possible only because the aircraft flew, flew the region, collected the point clouds, which were then processed, quality assured, and published as a 1 meter resolution digital elevation model. And those are available for download from the Manitoba Land Inventory. Our firm has downloaded all the data. We have it on our own servers. And if there's ever any issues, we have 100% coverage of the entire province available as well. And we would, of course, make that freely available to anyone who needed it, should the unusual situation arise where the provincial servers were not available.
Right, and I had said John asked, it was actually Dwight, so thank you very much. And that link and information will be shared. Kyle or Brian had asked, how do one acquire the LiDAR manual? That will be put online and sent out to everybody that's signed up. If you miss that part, if somebody's looking for it later, you can go onto the website at www.redriverbasincommission.org, and all that information will be made available, or you can call our office, or you can reach out to Hank at Strategic. Can LiDAR replace our regular surveying process and analysis for drainage projects? Hank, that's for you.
Yeah, a lot, I would say 80% yes. It's likely that you can do most of your planning process using LiDAR only. When you're getting down to the level of an individual ditch and placing the invert level of a specific culvert, I think you would still use conventional survey methods to ensure that everything is absolutely right. But I think you could probably reduce your workflow a lot using LiDAR for planning and design.
Right. The bottom line is that you can plan from the seat of your desk and get confirmation of what's needed when the project comes. And it may be something simple too, like you said, to be precise on the laying of culvert may need some surveying, but other than that, it should suffice, and you can do very well. And it's very cost effective as well too.
How current is the LiDAR information available on the provincial site?
So the answer is it varies. The newest data was published within the last 12 months. It depends on where you are. There is some, I think all of the old stuff has been reflown now, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So there was, until recently, some old data that was collected in the years immediately following the 97 flood at 5-meter resolution. As far as we know, and we checked recently, that has all been updated. So I believe the oldest data, which was at 5 meters, is now superseded along the main stem of the Red River Valley. And the city of Winnipeg was missing some data, but that has all been filled in now. The accuracy does vary. The new stuff is got about a 2 centimeter accuracy, whereas some of the older stuff would be about in the 6-7 centimeter vertical accuracy. So the metadata has the date of acquisition. The oldest 1 meter data will be, accurate to 10 centimeters or so. The newest stuff will be accurate to within 2 centimeters. So that speaks to the issue of, do you need, traditional survey methods? The newer the LiDAR data, the less likely you're going to need traditional survey.
So let's go on, Hank. Can you talk a little bit about QGIS?
Sure. QGIS stands for Quantum GIS, is what's known as free open source software. It's what we use in our shop. It is, I guess, a competitor to the ArcGIS commercial set of products. If you have high capacity using another GIS such as ArcGIS, feel free to use it. We use QGIS because it's free and it's very well designed to handle large data sets such as LiDAR. So the learning curve is easy. It's if you have any GIS capacity at your municipality or your agency, picking up QGIS will be easy and free and capable of dealing with these large data sets. So we like it. Feel free to use whatever software you want, but our recommendation is QGIS.
Thank you very much. We do have a few more questions that pop up. Rebecca, you want to give those questions out to us, please?
Sure. Can a LiDAR layer be provided on ArcGIS for shared use with different increments, 5 meter, 1 meter, and 0.3 meter for contours?
Yeah, there's no constraint. If you have the ArcGIS capabilities, you have Spatial Analyst, which is an ArcGIS extension. and you have the RAM, enough memory on your workstation to handle that contour work, yes, definitely.
Thank you. We have one more question. Go ahead.
Do you know if the province will accept LiDAR for surveying for a drainage license?
Good question. We're working with the municipality, and we don't have a definitive answer on that yet. We think so. We think in some cases the new LiDAR is accurate enough, and we're kind of pushing that point with a client right now. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I just want to say that the province has been a strong partner in obtaining the recent LiDAR. They partnered and funded with us the collection, like I said earlier, that was done in the Interlake and the Pembina Valley area. So those are the areas that, Hank, that you recently worked on to do the climate adaptation plans that we're going to talk about a little bit soon, in a little bit. And I think it's something that they would probably give consideration to as they go forward. So
yeah, just one other point on that. And it depends on the details of what you're trying to do. So what the LiDAR does give you is a very accurate delineation of the drainage area contributing to the feature that you want to drain. So whether the province accepts the size of the culvert, let me think about this. Yeah, I actually believe that they will, based on recent precedent. I mean, it depends on the details of the drainage license, but I believe based on recent precedent, recent work we've done, they will.
yeah, we just received in the question box a comment from Boziger, who has used LiDAR data for drainage licensing in the past, so that's positive. We do have another question, Hank, if you would, Rebecca, please.
Do you use LiDAR to run different scenarios and potential outcomes for certain drainage projects?
Definitely. In fact, yes, using both ponding models and what are known as hydrodynamic models, we've done different scenarios. And I'll say one very interesting feature that we've been able to deduce is that for some culvert projects, some drainage projects, the effective drainage area changes as a function of the scenario you're running. So if you're running a 1 in 20 year, your effective drainage area may be much smaller than a 1 in 50 year event, a 1 in 50 year scenario, because of the ponding effect, which the LiDAR captures and will show you how that effective drainage area changes depending on the scenario. Yeah, we've done some. You would never see this effect unless you had the high resolution LiDAR to detect the change in effective drainage area.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Jody. Rebecca, if you will, please.
Jody just says, I think it's more of a comment, less acquisition, more in observation. LiDAR may be reading up to 1 meter high in wetland and other areas with dense grasses.
That's a good comment, Hank, eh?
Super interesting point, yeah. And it gets to this idea of, I think that's Jody Gertson, and we have, she's told us about this issue, that in some wetlands area, you've got this decaying biomass that actually distorts the ground level. You can't see through the decaying biomass in the wetland, the cluster, like the thick vegetation. I guess sometimes it's not dead or decaying, but you've got such thick vegetation that the LiDAR can't penetrate it. LiDAR's not perfect. No technology is. You fly it when the leaves are off, when the vegetation is at a minimum, early spring, late fall, when the snow's off. Even with those timing windows, it's never perfect. You can get distortions from high biomass situations in wetlands, which fools the LiDAR into believing the land elevation is higher than it actually is. Those things do happen.
Right, and just as you spoke of, it's important to try to fly in the fall because most of the leaves are off, but we do have a process of truthing the data, which in those areas, if they were getting further down shots with depths, would mean that perhaps the ground levels before, and that is reviewed. Would I be right to say that? Yeah, your mic. keep your mic on, Hank.
Sure, Steve. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, I think the province does a pretty good job in their quality assurance, but there's some things, it's like just another shout out to Jody. To improve the quality of the LiDAR in her district, she's done a comprehensive culvert inventory, because culverts are another thing the LiDAR can't see. It can't see through thick biomass, and it can't see through a gravel road or a paved road to see where the culvert is. So there are some, if you know how to do it, there are some corrections you should make to your LiDAR, which is hydro conditioning based on where the culvert lines are.
Definitely. So on video number 5, it's called QGI Basic. And it's a second introduction, because on video 4, we do the introduction to QGIS. And Hank, maybe you can talk a little bit about video number 5 and how it relates to the manual. So basic QGIS.
Well, you'll see in the video some of the basic functionality for importing the data and processing the data. The manual follows very similarly. So if you've never used the software, we point you to where you can download it and install it. Again, this is just our recommendation. If you're comfortable using another software package and you're confident that you can manage these data sets, that's great. If you're new to this field and you're new to the use of this data, we like QGIS because it's free and powerful. And it's the same learning curve essentially as any other GIS package.
Right, thank you very much. So where we are is that we have 5 videos in the series of learning. The manual we have represents those 5 videos. So video number 1, what is LiDAR? Video number 2 is how is LiDAR data collected? Video number 3 is LiDAR data in Manitoba. That talks a little bit about what we had. So maybe we could play that video, Rebecca. We'll jump backwards, because I do know we have a small clip on that, and we could play maybe a couple of minutes about how that data is collected from Manitoba.
Today, we're going to take a look at the Manitoba geospatial inventory, and we want to take a look at where we can find reliable data for our region. So finding the best available data should always be the starting point. And having the most up-to-date data is essential, since landscapes are constantly changing, from whether that be from human development to natural erosion. Changes are slow, but they're continuous. Also, LiDAR data has become increasingly accurate, and recent data will be much more precise than data that was taken just a few years ago. The Manitoba Land Initiative, or MLI, is a cross-departmental initiative to make available geospatial information. And as we mentioned in the previous videos, the province has been making critical investments to data acquisition and high-resolution topographical data, and it is a foundation of land use and climate adaptation planning. The federal government also has an inventory of geospatial data. Although its resolution is much lower than the quality that we see at MLI, nevertheless, we leave the link because we want you to have the opportunity to have additional resources. We're going to now show you how to access MLI and how to download the files for your region. Once in the welcome page, you'll need to find the LiDAR data inventory. Many LiDAR files are large, which, depending on your internet connection, may take several minutes to a couple of hours to download. Make sure you have the space in your hard drive first before you start that process. The files need to be taken out of the zip and placed in your folder of choosing before using them on any type of GIS software. In this series of videos, we'll be using QGIS, which is a free open source software that can download at qgis.org. We'll look further into this over the next few videos.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that kind of explained what we were talking about. There are a couple of more questions, Hank, that came in, and let's see if we can get them answered. Rebecca, if you want to go ahead.
Yep. Can LiDAR and sonar be used to calculate the true amount of water flow passing through a body of water instead of a mathematical equation?
That's for you, Hank.
Yeah, so you could use LiDAR to, I think you would use it with, it wouldn't be the only thing, I don't think it would be sonar. I think you would have what's called a stage elevation curve for a particular site, which relates the elevation of a river to the flow at that point. So you have something called a stage elevation curve. And then LiDAR is not water penetrating. It, unlike radar remote sensing, which is water penetrating. So this would be pushing the limits of the technology, but it is in principle possible to get water elevations from LiDAR. And then you could relate that to what's called a stage elevation curve to get the flow in the river at that point. However, the limitation on that approach is the LiDAR isn't acquired at high enough frequency. You're not flying an airplane every day or every hour to get the variation in flow. So you could get some point estimates. If you knew the exact time of acquisition of the LiDAR data, you could get the flow, and you had the stage elevation curve for that point in a river channel. You could get the flow at that single point in time. I think that so what's happening though in the space industry is that people are launching satellites frequently. It's a big growth industry in technology. Is remote sensing companies starting up and launching satellites and producing high frequency radar remote sensing of and multispectral remote sensing. So you will see that in the future, I believe, where different types of remote sensing will be used to estimate water flow. LiDAR and sonar won't do it for you now.
So we have a couple of more questions, if you don't mind, Rebecca.
Is it possible to import LiDAR point clouds into AutoCAD Civil 3D for surface creation?
Short answer is yes. You should be able to, as a geotiff, eh?
It would be a TIFF. You'd have to process the point cloud with like the LAS point cloud.
So yeah, you wouldn't do the raw point cloud, but as a DEM, you could.
As far as I know,
yeah. As a digital elevation model, not the raw point cloud, but as a digital elevation model, as a geotiff, you should be able to import it into CAD software.
Thank you. Rebecca?
What computer programs do you need to use in order to develop scenarios, ponding and flooding, or drainage outcomes for projects? Is a professional needed, or can counselors do this on their own?
Well, that's an interesting question. So what software do you need? Well, there's some, again, I'll focus on the free software that's available as free downloads. HEC-RAS, the US Army Corps of Engineers produces something called the River Analysis System. It's free software, generally used by engineers. So it's civil technicians, civil technologists generally have the capability to use HEC-RAS and high resolution digital elevation models. My understanding is that the province drainage licensing process does require a professional engineer to sign off. We have done this for clients. We are a professional engineering shop, and I am PEng, and we would do the requisite due diligence, but we like any other engineering consultancy with professional engineers on staff could sign off on something like that.
Thank you for that, Hank. Let's have another question there, Rebecca.
Does the Manitoba database include 1 in 200 flood year protection level information?
We have not seen that. We don't believe so. I think that mapping work is Well, I've got some meetings lined up with Manitoba Infrastructure, and I'll know more in a few weeks, frankly. More in the new year. My belief is that information is not published. I'm not 100% sure of that. We have not seen it.
We
Yeah, I would
actually
like to echo that.
comment by Kyle to that one. I think it's a 99 year. I was just talking to those guys a few weeks back when they were taking depths on the Pembina River here in Killarney. They said all data is available on the Manitoba website.
Yeah, I think some of that data is very hard to find, but it is accessible, and the province does keep it. I think all you would have to do is reach out and try to get into the province source. So they've been really good to work with. There is another question there.
Yeah. Have you used Global Mapper software for LiDAR?
Yeah, we have not used Global Mapper.
Never heard of that one, Scott. Sorry, buddy. Okay, so I think we're done for the questions for that part. I just want to rescope of what we said. So what the Red River Basin has done, we worked alongside just through Strategic in order to create a base model of learning for those who really do not understand what LiDAR is, but want to be able to utilize LiDAR. For counselors, the idea would be for you to understand what it is and the value of what it can bring. For the staff, it would give you the opportunity to be able to work alongside your watersheds, or if you're independent, to be able to sit down and on a computer and do work through QGIS. As Hank said, the information is available on the Manitoba website. The software itself is free as long as you have a computer and the capacity that you can sit down and you can do some self-teaching. And the manuals alongside the videos will get you to the first step. And as we go forward, again, our hopes is that we will have an intermediate and advanced manual being produced over the next 12 months. So one step will take you into the other. And I don't know if you're ever going to be able to do some of the things that the questions came out of here today. I think some of that work would be left to the professionals like Strategic and other organizations. But I think as a municipality and as staff, you have the opportunity for both your council and yourself to understand the values that are presented before you. So when you're making budget decisions on things like maybe drainage work or maybe wetland renewal, water retention for the purpose of drought and irrigation, that you can feel confident that the information before you is true and accurate. So I think it's a great introduction to the first 5 videos. It'll give you a really good start on LiDAR and the understanding of what it is and how to utilize it to best fit your municipality. But during the process, we didn't stop there, because part of what we've done at the Red River Basin is that we also wanted to create some basic climate adaptation plans. And we worked with Hank and Matt, and we produced a number of more videos, videos 6 to 13, which will carry you through the information of how the climate adaptation information is brought forward, how the plans are made and developed. And I think it's a really good source of information. So Hank, I'm going to let you have the opportunity to maybe start talking about the video series 6 to 13 and carry us through. We do have a couple of shows that we are going to, or video runs that we're going to do on each session, and then we'll do a Q&A after each one. So Hank?
Well, just to say, you know, the LiDAR is the gift that keeps on giving, and we are concerned about you know, climate change and the increased frequency of floods and droughts. And basically, the challenge before us is to sort of relearn the wisdom of the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, the good old PFRA, as they got us out of the Dust Bowl, and they really focused on water harvesting and what we now call natural infrastructure as the ways to adapt to and recover from drought. And so we have the challenge before us in this generation to relearn that logic and wisdom, but bring this new technology to the table to guide us in how to do that with minimal negative environmental impact and maximum positive environmental impact. And the LiDAR and modern computing power are tremendous resources to draw upon as we develop this new culture of water harvesting for flood and drought protection. I see here we have the FOSS Finder. do you want, this is another interesting application of the LiDAR where we're getting estimates of how much nutrient mobility is possible on the landscape because we have the LiDAR, when we have the flow paths very, very accurately modeled, and we can estimate how much sediment moves and how much phosphorus moves, which is the guts of the phosphominder tool. This one is not so much focused on climate adaptation. This one's focused on water quality, and I'll leave it to Steve and Rebecca if they want to show this one.
I don't think that one we're going to show. I think that's you're going to be introducing that soon, right?
Yeah, we're going to launch that product soon. That's
we want to give you the opportunity to do that without us stealing something away on you, Hank. So stay tuned on that one, folks. We'll move on to video number 7, which is reducing climate risk in Manitoba. But before we do that, we have a few more questions, and let's see if we can get them answered. Rebecca?
Sure, we just have one more question. How often does the province plan to update the LiDAR information?
I think I could probably answer that a little bit. You know, it's a different day. We're finding that we have a new premier in, Premier Stephenson, and we're finding that there seems to be a little more willingness to work alongside the basin and some of the other things. We're hoping that that's going to happen more frequently. We all understand the value of LiDAR, and as the province, you know, they have to do their annual budget. They have to work with something that makes it affordable. It depends on where we see that value. So we don't have an exact answer, but we believe that it's going to start getting picked up a lot more than it has in the past. And just let's kind of leave it at that. So video number 7, Hank?
You can start to address larger scale issues around water quality and water quantity at a watershed scale, which is the ideal scale for planning water resources projects. When we plan at the watershed scale, we consider both upstream and downstream causes and effects, and it allows us to get a more holistic view of actions to prioritize to address water quality and quantity issues. Watersheds extend beyond the boundaries of communities or municipalities and are often the most sensible geographic unit for water resources planning. Watershed-based planning tends to consider issues like floods and droughts. After a stretch of wet years, you may be wanting to prioritize infrastructure like dikes, for example, that provide flood protection. That may be your priority. However, if you invest that money and then it's followed by a stretch of dry years, protecting only against flood won't be the best use of that money, the best use of that investment. The impacts of climate change are varied, including increased flooding and more intense rainfall events. But from the perspective of climate adaptation, we actually need to take a bigger view of this. The key to climate adaptation planning is keeping that big picture in mind. It's strategizing and implementing plans at a watershed scale that address the objective of making people, municipal assets, and the local economy more resilient to the impacts of climate change. We need to have the foresight to anticipate both flood and drought. Imagine a community that is experiencing extremely low water levels in their nearby river. They make the decision to implement a dam to back up water and maintain water levels. They jump through planning and licensing hoops, put out a contract for design, and tender the construction. Now that water is held at a level satisfactory to the community, downstream communities may find their reach of the river also running dry. So stepping back and looking at the watershed as a whole, considering possibly a network of retention areas so the whole watershed is protected, or a series of small dams along this reach of the river would have benefited communities both upstream and downstream. Conversely, some communities or landowners, when faced with too much water, may choose to build drainage projects to get the water off their land or away from their assets as quickly as possible. Significant upstream drainage, however, may cause too much water downstream. It may exacerbate flooding conditions downstream. Without a holistic view, the water downstream may have nowhere to flow in time, causing a backup of water and flooding impacts. Typically, when climate adaptation investments are made on a small scale, it's because of budget constraints. Funders often prefer larger projects. Bundling planning activities at the larger watershed scale can open doors to much larger funding opportunities. So there's two reasons to take a watershed view. The likelihood of getting it right, upstream and downstream issues, is higher. And by bundling upstream and downstream projects, you've just made the entire bundle of projects more attractive to some funders. On the water quality side, issues such as nutrient loading, phosphorus and nitrogen, for example, are also sensibly managed, often better managed, at the watershed or basin scale. Nutrient loading in this part of the world is typically caused by non-point sources. That means there's no specific single point or spill location that feeds the nutrients into the water. Non-point source loading implies that activities throughout the entire watershed are contributing to nutrient levels at its outlet. Therefore, the impacts of nutrient loading is, in a sense, responsibility of the entire watershed. There's no other way to do it well than together at the watershed scale. Climate adaptation plans that focus on both water quality and quantity are underway throughout the Red River Basin that produce a range of benefits, including flood and drought risk reduction, improved water quality, reduced downstream nutrient transport, decreased erosion and sedimentation, increased biodiversity, projects that will sequester carbon, and improve habitat quality and quantity. Planning a watershed-based adaptation strategy that delivers on these multiple benefits involves, firstly, the creation of a hydro-conditioned digital elevation model, as we discussed, developing flood risk maps, identifying a distributed water retention storage network, using GIS as a decision support system for which projects to actually develop, and also using GIS to assist in communicating to stakeholders which projects you're prioritizing and why.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was reducing climate risk in Manitoba. Part of the work, as I said earlier, what we did, well, we felt in order to take the data, we had to make it work, and creating the climate adaptation plans was doing exactly that. We have no other questions right now, so video 8 would be climate risk estimations methods. And we're not going to show that slide, but Hank, you want to talk a little bit about that for us?
There's standard tools now available in Canada to get your design events. There's some discussion about scenarios. So the standard 1 in 20, 1 in 50, 1 in 100 design events are shifting as a result of climate change. And no one has a perfect way to factor climate risk into this. But there are reasonably standardized tools. And I believe it's this video that where we talk about how to just dial up your climate risk estimation from web resources.
We're going to go on to video 9. And video 9 is how climate change affects weather. And can we run that one, Rebecca?
Yeah.
This is the one where we take Hank and we turn him into Hank Jr.
It's actually a sock puppet, but
You're looking good there, buddy.
thank you.
In this video, we'll look at how climate change is affecting weather and what we need to do to adapt to climate change. Due to climate change, temperatures have been and continue to increase over time. Increasing heat leads to increased evaporation from land. As a result, eventually heavier clouds form, causing more intense rainfall and flooding. Before climate change, we would get spring flooding from snowmelt around April and fairly predictable, consistent levels of summer flooding from heavy rain in the latter half of the growing season. However, with climate change, snowmelt occurs earlier, spring flooding will be less predictable, usually lower than historic, sometimes higher than historic spring flooding, and summer flooding is less predictable as well. At the end of the year, there will often be lower levels of water available in reservoirs and soil moisture. This means that we will likely have harsher, longer periods of drought to contend with in the future. But what can we do? Since climate change also will still cause heavy snow melt and occasionally heavy rainfall, what we can do is retain the water from these events and store them to rely on them during drought periods. How do we do this? The new approach to climate adaptation is natural infrastructure and nature-based solutions. Using LiDAR data, we can measure the depths of an area and establish where it would be efficient to build retention basins. These basins collect the water that would typically flood an area downstream, water that we can use during drought periods, water harvesting, if you will. We can do this over many areas of a watershed and develop many retention basins, networks of retention, providing both flood and drought protection.
So that's video number 9, how climate change affects weather. And let's move on to video number 10, flooding and drought impacts.
And in this video, we'll look at the effects of droughts and floods. As mentioned, increased heat associated with climate change causes more evaporation, then more heavy rainfall occasionally, and more flooding. So climate change is causing both risks of droughts and floods to increase. Droughts are very expensive. If water levels drop too low, municipal water treatment plants may be unable to draw water from their raw water source, be it a reservoir or a river. That means communities must find more water on an emergency basis, which could include shipping water in by tanker, for example, which can be very expensive. And obviously, drought causes crop yields to drop, which can hurt farm profits significantly. Flooding also causes economic damages. In built-up areas, there are at least 3 types of economic costs from flooding. Firstly, there is the direct physical impact. This refers to flooding that causes physical damage to infrastructure. For example, a store here being demolished by the force of flowing floodwater. The second knock-on economic cost is business closure, when a flood-damaged building forces the store to close. The last is people displaced from flooding. Flooding can cause residences to be inaccessible, inhospitable, inhabitable because of the damages. As a result, people must move either temporarily or permanently. As you can see, both of these climate impacts, droughts and floods, have economic costs. Public Safety Canada says that overland flooding costs the Canadian economy more than any other weather hazard we face. It is the single largest draw on the disaster financial assistance arrangements that are federal backstops to help communities recover from disasters. Public Safety Canada is providing Manitoba communities with guidance on how to invest in climate resilience to reduce flood damages through accurate analysis of costs and the benefits of flood protection. LiDAR is key. It's essential to getting realistic, accurate estimates of flood damages. LiDAR measures how high different buildings sit on the land, and it's important because elevations are critical to understanding exposure to flood risks. We'll build on this concept in the next video.
Thank you for that. And that was video number 10, and it gives consideration to flooding and drought impacts. And the reason that that's so important for municipalities, because climate change is becoming a reality. And as you saw some of the charts that were presented by Hank at the beginning, it's something which is not necessarily always predictable. And there will be variables in that. And if we are looking and giving consideration to climate change, we may have periods where we go into late falls with heavy moisture, lots of precipitation during the winter, we get a melt, we start flooding, but coming in the summer we're into a drought, and we're addressing water shortages similar to what some of the southern region had this year. So it's a responsibility of you guys as elected officials or as municipal or First Nation staff in order to help prepare your communities. And we see this tool here, LiDAR, as one of the ways to do it. And then being able to understand what those risks are by creating climate adaptation plans in more detail for your community is a solid answer. Many will take the information that comes from the climate adaptation plans and actually introduce it into their emergency response. You can't predict how much water we could get being caused by a flood. If you look at BC right now and the devastation that's occurring there, you know, you think about what happened here in the 97 flood, the flood of the century. It does happen, it can happen, and it will happen again here. And you're better to be prepared, you're better to be proactive, because it's a hell of a lot more money to be reactive. So let's move on to the next video. Rebecca, if you would, please.
And in this video, we'll discuss climate adaptation and specifically the power of LiDAR to analyze flood risk exposure. The increased heat from climate change causes desiccated soil, dried out soil that doesn't absorb water. It also causes occasionally very heavy rainfall. This results in more water not infiltrating and instead traveling overland and overwhelming watersheds and stream beds and towns. As mentioned in an earlier video, the IDF-CC tool allows us to estimate the elevated risk of extreme rainfall events, extreme precipitation. The IDF-CC tool is useful for comparing a variety of weather impacts in the context of climate change. We can estimate how many millimeters of rain will fall in a 24-hour period, comparing a 1 in 20-year event, a 1 in 50-year event, and a 1 in 100-year event with two different standard climate change scenarios called RCP 4.5 and RCP 8.5. And we compare these scenarios to the historic 1 in 20-year event, 1 in 50-year event, and 1 in 100-year event. The RCP 4.5 and 8.5 scenarios illustrate the effect of higher loading of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. But you may be asking, so what? Am I a greater financial risk? Let's find out using the LiDAR data. Public Safety Canada provides standard damage functions for building assets at risk. Using these functions and the LiDAR data, we can measure the levels of flooding that will cause different levels of damages to these assets. LiDAR lets us measure very accurately the ground level elevation of buildings, houses, stores, shopping malls, factories. As a flood rises, these different buildings are damaged to different levels. Over an entire watershed, the LiDAR also tells us exactly the lay of the land. This is important because these elevations play a role in how water will travel over the landscape. Using the LiDAR data, we can estimate how water will accumulate in depressions and stream beds and their flooding impact on towns and crops. We do this for clients using LiDAR, geographic information systems, and flood risk modeling software. We use WDPM, Telemac, and high-performance cloud computing to harness the full power of the high-quality, high-resolution LiDAR data available within Manitoba. These modeling tools are state-of-the-art and can help us predict how floods will occur before they do and estimate their financial impact. In the next video, we'll explore climate adaptation that builds resilience to flooding and drought.
So Hank, maybe you want to talk a little bit on how that climate change elevates the risk and how that consideration is given when municipalities are looking at, maybe how it affects their insurances and stuff like that, or how it affects them getting grants?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of practical things, right? I mean, if, so we all have heard about the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, ICIP, and there was just a submission deadline 10 days ago, November 15th. So probably some of the people on the call got organized and submitted to Infrastructure Canada. We helped a couple clients out in that regard. There's an expectation that you analyze your climate risk. nowadays. The federal government expects proponents of infrastructure projects to understand the climate risk to their project, and preferably to understand how their project reduces climate risks. It's becoming the standard way of doing business. If you're trying to attract infrastructure investment to your community, you're proposing a project, you're trying to, or the other case where it affects directly municipal interest is, as you say, Steve, insurance. I was just chatting with some folks from an insurance company, and they recognize this risk. They were unaware of there's disconnects out there in the market. The market is not perfect. The market does not have perfect information, and insurers don't necessarily have accurate flood risk maps. So in many cases, a proactive municipality can get out ahead of their insurer and say, hey, look, we know our exposure and it's not as bad as you think it is because we've got better analysis, so drop our rates. That's a good scenario, and that could be the case. And if you had the analysis and you could push your insurer on the point, maybe they'll drop your rates because you're proactive, you know what you're doing, and you've done the analysis to prove that you're not at risk. The third area that I think is in everyone's interest is, if you want to, let's use the example of BC and the recent flooding there. So who's going to invest in those communities in the aftermath of that disaster? I certainly wouldn't. I wouldn't build a factory or open a shopping center in one of those municipalities until they could prove they're taking their risk out. I'm in the business of community economic development and attracting investment. I better be sure that my community is not at risk, and I can demonstrate to would-be investors that we're not at risk.
Right, and that will also be part of a requirement perhaps for infrastructure funding as they go forward.
It certainly will be. It is already. There's increasing scrutiny and stringency on these infrastructure proposals that climate risk is well understood.
Right, and I think that leads us to the next video, which is the past and future of climate resilience. So let's take a look at this video, shall we?
And in this video, we'll look at the past and future of climate resilience. From the Insurance Bureau of Canada's 2018 report on natural infrastructure, you can see that from 1970 to 2015, the amount of weather events requiring disaster financial assistance compensation to the provinces and territories increased significantly. Many of these events were pluvial floods, floods that occur over a large area due to heavy rainfall. An example of this in Manitoba is the RM of Stuart Burns flooding in June 2020. Other events that cause a lot of damages are fluvial floods. This is the flooding from rising rivers. Sometimes a region will be hit with such a heavy rainfall event that it incurs both fluvial overland flood damages and fluvial flood damages, the flood of consequent rising rivers. Our challenge is to understand these elevated risks in the context of climate change and decrease this risk, creating opportunities for smart investment in climate resilience. As mentioned in other videos, increased heat from climate change leads to increased evapotranspiration, which leads ultimately to heavier clouds and more intense rainfall events. To reduce this rainfall-driven pluvial flood risk, the risk of flooding over land, we have built culverts, ditches, and networks of ditches to channel water off farmland. To reduce fluvial flood risk, the risk of rising rivers, we've built, for example, the floodway around the city of Winnipeg, used rock armoring in vulnerable places, raised bridges, built dikes, and raised houses, all of which has been essential and will be needed in the future. The new kid on the block is natural infrastructure as a climate adaptation strategy that builds resilience to both elevated flood and drought risk. In Winnipeg, the Bridgewater Forest subdivision has a stormwater retention basin. This basin prevents floods by collecting stormwater runoff, provides habitat to wildlife, and uses vegetation to prevent nutrients from flowing downstream, also providing water quality protection. The Bridgewater Forest Stormwater Basin uses natural infrastructure principles to enhance flood and drought protection, protect water quality, and increase habitat for waterfowl and other wildlife. At a different geographic scale, the Shellmouth Reservoir in western Manitoba is a good example of engineered multi-purpose water resources management. The Shellmouth Reservoir and Dam are in western Manitoba, near the Saskatchewan border. Shellmouth regulates the Assiniboine River before it reaches Winnipeg. Shellmouth was constructed in 1972 by the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration. Shellmouth is designed to fill in the spring from snowmelt runoff and provides downstream flood protection. Later in the year, controlled releases from Shellmouth provide sufficient water in the Assiniboine River to ensure that water is available in the Assiniboine for drinking water, for example.
Thank you. And that video was the past and future of climate resilience. And we do have one more video to go. I don't see any other questions. In order for us to keep going, I think we can maybe run the very last video in this series.
Consider this fictional area. They have a water treatment plant. There's a town here inside this municipality and inside this watershed. There's many assets, stores, cropland, houses, even a factory, all of which have their own damage function appropriate to that type of building. It begins to rain, the rain flows over land, flows into the river starts to rise, and there's damages to all of those assets. We'll use the LiDAR and the ground elevation of the buildings and the damage functions provided by Public Safety Canada to estimate the flood damage cost to those assets as a dollar figure. Now we can combine the flood damages for all of those assets, sum them all up to calculate the full flood damage for that particular event. This dollar amount of flood damage is for a hypothetical 1 in 20 year flooding event and is the sum across the whole region of interest, probably a municipality or the watershed. Doing nothing means every year we're exposed to flood risk, and over 50 years, that adds up to a lot of expected damages. Climate change adaptation means investing for the future and reducing these risks for our benefit and for our children's benefit. So what should we do? We recommend using LiDAR to design natural infrastructure projects that provide flood and drought protection and other important benefits. For example, if we build a project like Pelly's Lake, we reduce the flood damages. During a summer drought, we can release water from the reservoir to provide water for the water treatment plant. And if we combine the concept of harvesting biomass from the site when it's dry in the fall, we also create a water quality benefit, a habitat benefit, and we have an economically valuable resource, the biomass itself. How do we calculate all the benefits? Let's focus on flood protection firstly. Let's assume the project costs $1 million. We need to compare this against the benefit of reduced flood damages in future years. We can estimate the benefit cost ratio of the project to help establish its investment case. Let's assume the project costs $1 million to build. So let's compare that to the first year of reduced damages. The cost ratio of year one is, say, $200,000. So let's take that benefit of reduced flood damages and divide it by the project costs. So that's $200,000 of benefit as reduced flood damages divided by $1 million. That equals 0.2, which is not a very good benefit cost ratio, and that would mean this is not a good investment. The thing is, the project creates benefits for a long time, so let's look at the next 50 years. To calculate the benefit cost ratio over 50 years, we add up the benefits through years 1 to 50 and divide by that same $1 million initial project cost. We've got a benefit cost ratio of 4.0, which is very good, and this project should be implemented. Infrastructure Canada has recently changed the rules for funding eligibility under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, specifically encouraging natural infrastructure projects. Infrastructure Canada now allows us to stack benefits to calculate total project benefit cost ratio. Natural infrastructure projects like this create benefits beyond flood mitigation. They include drought mitigation, biomass production, habitat protection, water quality protection, and recreational opportunities. We can do all of this analysis, which is greatly facilitated by the availability of LiDAR provided by the Government of Manitoba, the infrastructure damage functions provided by Public Safety Canada to estimate flood risk and flood risk reduction benefits, and modern flood risk models such as WDPM and Telemac that can process the LiDAR. The case for natural infrastructure projects increases with climate change. Climate risks are higher, but so are the benefits of protection. In an earlier video, we used the IDFCC tool to see how climate change and the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere leads to an increase in 1 in 20, 1 in 50, 1 in 100 year precipitation events, and therefore more flood risk. Before climate change, a 1 in 20 year flood would still be costly. With climate change, that cost is greater yet. The risks are getting higher, and doing nothing will cost us more and more. On the other hand, investing for the future will save us more and more because the benefit of proactive climate adaptation will only increase.
Thank you very much for that. So we are just going to have a discussion as that was the last small portion of our last video. So what we've delivered today is that we have the capacity of LiDAR. I just want to go back to one of the questions that were asked by Michael Rempel, and how often does the province plan to update LiDAR? One of the things I want to say, I'm sorry, I was more thinking about the Red River Basin when I answered that question. You know, it's a fact that the Red River Basin has probably seen more flooding than any other part of the province of Manitoba, but we are the only basin that is fully flowing, and that the other basins, such as the Assiniboine River Basin Initiative, they're so badly wanting to fill many, many gaps that still exist out there, and that's still ongoing through an entire province. So if you're not within the Red River Basin, I really encourage you to, you know, talk to your local MLAs and talk to them about the importance of LiDAR. We would love to see complete coverage through the entire province of Manitoba. And it's only going to happen if we all work together in order to try to produce that and support one another. And that was the idea of the basin, coming up with the video series, coming up with the manual, and really talking about what the tool can do when it comes to creating climate adaptation plans. So now the basin itself, we have the LiDAR. And Hank has introduced to you QGIS, which is the free software in order to start working with the data that's within your area. Beyond that, what we want to say is that climate adaptation and how it relates to what we put here in the videos is really important. And we want to make sure that message is clear. And Hank, I don't know, like, let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about the importance of realizing that this is real, and we need to be prepared. And we did talk about it through the entire video series, but let's do maybe a quick little wrap up on that. We have a few more questions coming up too.
Do you want me to just sort of riff off that last comment on preparedness, perhaps? You know, I heard this story. I never met anyone with this opinion, but I heard the stories that when, you know, this is going back 8-10 years, I suppose, but when there was talk about making the investment in LiDAR acquisition, there were some people that suggested we shouldn't do it because we actually don't want to know. We don't want to know our risk. We don't want to be proactive, and we don't want to know. So we'd rather not bother, not spend the money and not acquire this information. Fortunately, those voices were in the small minority, and the investment was made and the LiDAR was acquired. So now we have it, and now we can apply it. And it's basically, it's a proactive insurance. This is self-insurance. You can go buy insurance in the market. Maybe you'll get a good price. Maybe the insurer will know more than you, or maybe not. Maybe those things aren't the case. What you have here is an opportunity to be proactive, to understand your risks, to invest proactively, creatively, with the support of different levels of government, because you know how much benefit you'll get from that investment. So this opportunity lies before us. Our viewpoint is, you know, we start this process now, or we hand off to the next generation a much worse situation.
And I think realistically, Hank, as we look at it, and we already mentioned it, for those municipalities that are seeking major infrastructure dollars, you're going to have to prove that the construction of whatever you're looking at is going to be safe, and climate adaptation is going to be part of that equation. Would you agree?
Well, without question, without question. And it's coming from various levels. It's coming from the insurance industry and from the reinsurance industry. The insurers of the insurers want this information. They want to know who's exposed and how much. It's coming from Infrastructure Canada, because the federal government doesn't want to pay out on the backstop through the disaster financial arrangements. They know that there's potentially an unmanaged liability there. So they're going to expect intelligent risk management from the bottom up, because they want to get out of that unmanaged liability called DFAA. There's an inevitability about all of this, and we're very, very fortunate that the province, in its wisdom, made this investment in LiDAR.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we're going to wrap up here right away. I want to thank you, Hank. And is Matt still with you?
He is. He is.
There he is. Hey, Matt, wave. You heard Matt's voice every now and then giving the information. I wanted to make sure that we got his face put onto the web here. So it's recorded. You're there for history, buddy.
That's been enormous help in our GIS capacity at Strategic. Are there any other questions that have come in? I mean, there's some new information here about the national infrastructure and the benefit calculations and so on. I'm just curious if there's questions that have come in on these points.
What we've got is questions that I'm going to answer right away. So, you know, it's talking about where the links are on the websites and stuff like that. So, and somebody's already posted it. So, other than that, those of you who have further questions, I want to tell you, you can feel free to reach out to Hank at Strategic Engineering at any time. Reach out to us. We're certainly going to be there for you all. So what I wanted to close in saying is that this recording, all the videos that are on there, which are 13 in total, the 5 representing the work that we did with Strategic on the manual, the other 6 to 13 on the importance of climate adaptation, will all be available online. We will be sending an email link out to each and every one of you who signed up with that source of information, or you will be able to go onto our website and download it from there. This is the beginning, I want to say that. And it is our hopes as we go forward that you'll all want to gain further knowledge on LiDAR and climate adaptation, because it really feels important to your communities. And we expect to have future presentations, not only, as I said earlier, regarding intermediate and advanced manuals, which we'll be working alongside with Strategic and Hank to produce, but also we are hoping, and we will be, matter of fact, on Monday, December the 13th, starting at 1 o'clock, we will be planning our virtual sessions regarding the climate adaptation plans that we already did. So we will be sending an invite out to each and every person that has took part within this video series and the manual series introductions. And we're hoping that you'll join us. We will be doing the 1-hour session separate. So the climate adaptation plan that was set up for the South will be introduced, and then the North. So the North is actually happening first from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and the South will be happening from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So I hope that you can come with us and take those in, because you'll find them very informative. So I do want to invite Charles Postumus, who's the chair of the North chapter, to come in for closing comments. And Charlie.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's great to see everybody again. LiDAR, we can see it's a tool for today and a tool for the future. But I'm looking at this, I see the old ways when we used to, out here in East St. Paul, you start at one end of the ditch and you dredge the ditch and you go all the way down and you clean the whole thing and you work, half a mile or a mile of ditch and you spend all your money on that. That's your project for the year. To me, with LiDAR, you can now fly over and find your problem section and just take care of that one area. And with LiDAR, it should be able to give you a cost of how to do that and save you quite a bit of money. That's my version of it, from the old till the new. As shown in our presentation, we can focus on, there's multi-benefits, agriculture, irrigation, potable water, flooding, wetland renewal, phosphate reduction, carbon storage, wildlife. I know I've been with the basin about 16 years, and I know going down to the south, seeing a lot of the stuff that they're doing with Minnesota being doing the 25% reduction. I think it's 20 by 25 through tile drainage, no mow zones, so the grasses filter the phosphates and that in the ditches. So a lot of good stuff's coming through that, but the LiDAR is even going to help this even more. Again, I guess I'm proud to be part of the Red River Basin. Our 2 chapters playing a role in this LiDAR and this new teaching manual. It's the beginning of much more to come. For those who desire to learn, as Steve was saying, this is kind of the start. For some of you, it may seem like it's grade 2. For me, it was good. And we are the north and the south region of the basin, so we have, saying that December 13th we're going to be having climate change starting with the 2 sessions. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Appreciate that, and I hope that you all attend the next session December 13th. And again, I'd like to thank Steve and the staff, and my board members from the north, Penny McMorris and Stan Perrette. I think Stan's on today. There are a lot of people on, so I didn't check everybody. But again, thank you all. Steve, thanks to the staff and you, and hopefully we see everybody on the 13th.
Thank you, everybody. We're really grateful for your coming out, and we hope that the few glitches that we have won't be there when we all get together again. So for now, on behalf of the Red River Basin Commission, my chair, my chapter's chair, and everybody else who's on board, we're grateful for your time. Now you got the tool, you got the capacity, get out and learn, folks. We'll chat with you again soon. Bye for now.